All right. We are continuing now in Mark, and we're going to be looking at some other observations. First of all, Mark was possibly a witness to the arrest of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. In Mark 14:51 and 52, it says, "A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind." And some have speculated that this young man was, in fact, Mark himself. Why would this be put in? It really has nothing to do with the train of thought here, the plot of the story. And it's just like it was put in as a miscellaneous kind of information. Could it be that that young man was Mark? Well, we don't know. And of course, it's speculation. But some have felt that possibly it was. Mark gives a fuller story of Simon of Cyrene, who was compelled to carry Christ's cross. You remember the story when Christ is going to the cross, they compelled this man, Simon of Cyrene, he was from the nation of Cyrene, to carry Christ's cross. Mark includes something that the other Gospels omit. He tells his readers that Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. Now, why would he identify Simon by the names of his sons? Normally, a person was identified by the name of his father. He must have felt that his readers would know who Alexander and Rufus were. Why else would he mention them? In Acts 13, we see that one of the elders of the church in Antioch was a man by the name of Simeon called Niger. Now, Simeon is a variant of Simon. Niger means black. Simeon, the black one. We would expect a person from Northern Africa, where Cyrene was, to possibly be black. Could it be that Simeon called Niger was in fact Simon of Cyrene? Well, it's a possibility. Now, if you look at Romans 16:13, there Paul says, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has been a mother to me too." Greet Rufus. Rufus was somebody that Paul knew. His mother had been like a mother to Paul. Now, Paul had never been in Rome, so it would have to be at another location where Paul had been. Could it be that it was in Antioch, where Simeon called Niger was an elder in the church? Could it be there that Rufus's mother was like a mother to Paul? Consider also the fact that Mark was probably written for a Roman audience, which is where Rufus was at the time. If you put all of these facts together, all these possibilities together, I should say, it could be that Simon of Cyrene was powerfully affected by carrying the cross of Christ, became a believer, and raised his family as believers in Christ, became an elder in the church in Antioch, and later his sons, or at least one son, moved to Rome, and Paul greeted him in the book of Romans. is speculation. We don't know for sure that that happened, but it is a possibility. And to me, it's a fascinating possibility that if we dig a little bit below the surface, maybe we can see something that isn't readily visible to the casual reader. Do you have any questions or comments about this? All right. Just one other observation. When we look at Peter's sermon at the house of Cornelius, as recorded in Acts 10:34 to 43, you can see a similarity between the outline of what he says and the book of Mark. So that would be another tie-in between Peter and the Gospel of Mark. All right. The ending of Mark. The last part of Mark's Gospel, chapter 16, verses 9 to 20, does not seem to have been original. The oldest and best manuscripts do not contain it. Now, this is something of controversy. Most scholars believe that it is not original. And if you look at modern versions of the New Testament, most of them will have verses 9 to 20 in brackets with a note that the oldest and best manuscripts don't contain it, or some other indication to that effect. There is also a shorter ending that was also in circulation at the time. The earliest Greek manuscript that contains the longer ending is from the 5th century. A 10th century Armenian version attributes the longer ending to a presbyter Ariston. And there was an associate of Papias by the name of Aristion, and maybe that is the person that it's referring to. How do we explain the fact that it's not there in the older manuscripts? The most satisfactory explanation is that the longer and shorter endings were attached to round out what seems to be a very abrupt and awkward ending. Some have speculated that the original manuscript, the last page or two got lost. And so what would have been on the last page or two is not there. And so it stops at a really abrupt place. And in order to complete the ending so that it reads well, that the other endings were put on. Others have said that perhaps something happened to Mark when he came to this part of the gospel and didn't finish it, or that perhaps he was going to write a second volume, much like Acts in its relationship to Luke. So, but it appears that verses 9 to 20 were not original. Now, there are some people who very strongly believe that it is original and argue strong for it, especially King James only people. And of course, it's in King James. But so there is some controversy here about these verses. Do you have questions here? Comments? All right. Let us go on then to the content of Mark. Let me see if I can bring this up. Hold on just a second. Let me stop the screen share and then restart it. and put it on for sound and optimizing. Okay, it says I have too many things open here and don't have enough resources. Let me see if it will go. No, I'm not able to do it. Okay, we will skip that then. Okay, the content. Papias, the church father, said that Mark took the preaching stories of Peter and put them into his gospel, but not necessarily in strict chronological order. But the feeling that we get from reading the book is not that it's just a hodgepodge of stories just put in with no thought as to order, but there is somewhat of an order. We have the ministry of John the Baptist, then we have Jesus' ministry in Galilee, we have Peter's confession, "You are the Christ," and then we have the journey to Jerusalem. So this does show us that there is an order. It moves from one place to another, and it culminates with the account of the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. In fact, Mark's outline has been called the synoptic framework, since the other evangelists follow his order here. As we look at the life of Jesus, as given in the three synoptic gospels, a pattern emerges. We have, first of all, the birth of Jesus in Matthew and Luke, and then we have the ministry of John the Baptist. We have Jesus' ministry in Galilee. The key turning point is Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then we have Jesus' journey to Jerusalem, and we have Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. So we see this in all three of the synoptics. There may be a little bit of variation as you look at the different ways that people outline. Some will have two parts to Jesus' ministry in Galilee, or two parts to Jesus' ministry in Jerusalem. But basically, this is the order that they follow. So it's Mark's order that is being used by Matthew and Luke. This is Kummel's outline of Mark. The introduction, the first 13 verses. Then the first part, Jesus in Galilee. The second part, Jesus' journeys inside and outside of Galilee. The third part, Jesus' journey to Jerusalem. The fourth part, Jesus in Jerusalem. And then the fifth part, the passion and resurrection narratives. Now, notice that Mark omits Jesus' birth. From the Gospel of John, we know that Jesus ministered in Jerusalem early on in his ministry, even though we don't have much of an indication of that in the synoptics. Luke tells us in one place that Jesus ministered in Judea, but Jesus was a devout Jew, and he would have gone to Jerusalem several times during this time, just as a devout Jew. And John records several of these times that he goes to Jerusalem throughout his ministry. We see that Mark in his gospel is abrupt. He gives little interpretation. He goes for short, simple facts. Do I have this? No, I don't. Now, that doesn't mean that he is brief. When he tells a story, he tells the whole story. Just making a notation here. So if you compare a story told in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, very often Mark is going to have the longest account, but he has fewer of the teachings of Jesus and fewer of the instances in his life. So if there are changes in Matthew and Luke, usually they abridge Mark. Mark also stresses the supernatural power of Jesus Christ. Now, there are some passages that are unique to Mark. That is, that they appear nowhere else in the Synoptic Gospels. There aren't very many, but there are a few. We have the parable of the growing seed in 4:26 to 29. The healing of the deaf and mute man, the healing of the blind man at Bethsaida, forgiveness of sins, a young man in a linen garment there in the Garden of Gethsemane. So these are things that are unique to Mark and do not appear in the other Gospels. Theological issues in Mark. First of all, the messianic secret. In the Gospel of Mark, we see that Jesus told people several times not to tell who he was. Sometimes he is identified as the Messiah or the Son of God, and Jesus says, do not tell anyone. Let's just look at some of those passages. Of the demons, it says, he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. He did not want the demons to tell people who he was. Jesus said to the leper, you must not tell this to anyone. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, you are the Son of God. But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Concerning the healing of Jairus' daughter, it says, he gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this. Concerning the healing of the deaf and dumb man, it says, Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. To the blind man whom he healed, Jesus said, don't even go into the village. And some manuscripts read, don't tell anyone in the village. After Peter made his confession that Jesus was the Christ, it says Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. After the transfiguration, it says, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. Now, why did Jesus do this? Let me just ask you, why do you think Jesus told people not to say who he was?
The time is not right.
Okay, the time was not right. Okay. If he was identified as the Messiah, they might try to go ahead and enthrone him. Okay.
Mhm.
What else do you think? Who else? Luisa, is that you?
Yes. Sorry, you can't see me because I'm using the office computer today. So I can see you all, but you won't be able to see me because there's no camera on my PC.
Okay, did you want to answer the question?
Yeah, just like Pastor Lisa said, it was not the right time to, yeah, for them to tell because the devil was around.
Okay,
Sir,
okay. Yes, Alan.
he doesn't need people's approval, just like it was mentioned in the Gospels that he knew what's in people's hearts. So
Okay,
he doesn't need people's affirmation.
all right, okay. All right, good thoughts.
Sir,
Yes,
could there have been some other like political reason why he was maybe trying to protect the disciples until because at the time they were not they didn't believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead but was stolen, and his followers may have just made up this whole resurrection story, and they were intent on finding out and punishing whoever was still spreading the resurrection story. I don't know. I'm just basically uh, guessing from other readings that I've had about that point in time.
all right.
There's a lot of chaotic and rumors going around to discredit the whole story about Christ's resurrection. I'm just
Well,
wondering if there was.
we need to consider, though, that this is before the crucifixion or the resurrection. So this is during.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is
I
during
must
his
have been.
ministry.
Oh, I
Right.
see. Okay, I wasn't sure. I wasn't
okay.
listening properly.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let us just hold these possibilities. Okay. Now, there was one scholar by the name of William Vreda in the early 20th century, and he proposed what he called the messianic secret. His theory was that Jesus did not claim to be the Messiah and was not seen as the Messiah during his lifetime. And because of that, he never told anyone to keep the secret. But after his life, the church did see him as the Messiah. Now, how can they explain this? It was perhaps an embarrassment that they were ascribing to Jesus something that he didn't claim for himself. So he came up, or he says they came up with the messianic secret. Jesus wasn't seen as the Messiah because he told people not to spread the word. So Vreda says Jesus never claimed to be the Messiah, and nobody really saw him as the Messiah until after his death. And so the church developed what he calls the messianic secret. However, what Vreda says doesn't really hold up to the facts. At times, Jesus tells people to spread the word about his ministry. So it's not like he never allows people to know what he is about. Sometimes he does. He enters Jerusalem to the acclaim of the crowds who quote messianic psalms. At his trial, Jesus claims to be the Messiah. And also, many of the things that Jesus tells people not to tell about do not have to do with his messianic identity. It might be healing somebody. Jesus healing Jairus's daughter. He said, don't tell anybody about this. But he's not saying, don't tell anybody I'm the Messiah. That is something else. Wright and Bird say his work was an unfortunate period now this is speaking of Vreda, okay, William Vreda. His work was an unfortunate period piece from a time when one influential strand of scholarship took it for granted that Jesus was an ordinary man whom the church subsequently divinized, made into God. Vreda, ironically, thus invented a Markan messianic secret to cover up for the lack of evidence for his own position.
Right.
So the scholarly world has largely rejected the Vreda's messianic secret because Mark will have nothing of a non-messianic Jesus. Now, there are today a few people who follow Vreda along this way, people like Burton Mack and John Dominic Crossan. Basically, they say that Mark is fiction, when in fact, they are writing fiction, not Mark.
Yeah.
I asked, why do you think that Jesus told people not to tell who he was? And we had some proposals here for what that might be. Any other ideas? Why would Jesus not want people to know that he is the Messiah? What do you think? Now, you all are Bible scholars. You can help me out here.
Because it was not yet time for them to know.
Okay, it wasn't time for them to know. All right. Okay.
This is
Yes,
it's me,
go
Sir
ahead.
Joan.
Joan.
This is just
Mhm.
my guess. Maybe because his if they will enthrone him as king at that time, but his purpose is not just an earthly kingdom. His reign will not just be an earthly kingdom, but the universal or heavenly. That's why he did not tell them.
All right. All
He
right.
asked them not to tell them.
Okay. I think that you're understanding what's going on here. What did the people of Jesus' day think the Messiah was going to do?
He's gonna institute a free kingdom of Israel, overthrow the Romans. It's something political
Okay.
and
That he
something
would-
radical. Yeah, it's a political Messiah, just like King David.
That's right. He was a political Messiah. That's what they were looking for. And so when people said, here is the Messiah, what are they going to think? He's going to get together an army. He's going to defeat Rome. But that's not what Jesus was about. He wasn't out to defeat Rome. He was to come in humility, die on the cross for our sins, and then at the second coming, he will come back with obvious power. Now, they probably would have tried to make him king. Jesus came to defeat their real enemy. They thought the real enemy was Rome, but the real enemy was Satan, and Jesus came to defeat Satan. All right, another thing, theological issue here is the requirements for discipleship. Jesus told that those who are going to be his disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow him. If you want to save your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for him and for the gospel, you're going to save it. What can a person give in exchange for their soul? And so Jesus clearly spells out the cost of discipleship here in Mark. And then finally, Mark's Christology. You know, there are those who say that Mark has a very human Jesus, whereas the other gospels that come later have a more divine Jesus. But I would like to contradict that idea. This is the way Mark begins. The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths for him. Mark sees this being fulfilled in John the Baptist. John the Baptist is the messenger which came ahead of Christ. This is taken from Isaiah. And let's see if I don't have the exact place in Isaiah. But in Isaiah, let me ask you this: who is the way being prepared for? I will send my messenger ahead of you, and you will who will prepare your way. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord and make straight paths for him. Who is this that is coming? What is that?
Messiah. The Messiah.
The Messiah?
The Lord.
Okay. Any other ideas here?
John the Baptist.
Well, John the Baptist is the messenger.
Yeah.
Okay. Who is the messenger preparing the way for in Isaiah?
For the Lord, for
The
us.
Son of
Jesus
God.
Christ.
Jesus.
Yahweh.
Mhm.
Okay. Someone said Yahweh. And that is right. This passage has to do with the return of Yahweh to Zion. Mark shows us that this is fulfilled in the coming of Jesus Christ. So in a very real sense, Yahweh and Jesus Christ are the same.
Yeah.
Mark puts Jesus into the role of fulfilling a prophecy about Yahweh. So at the very beginning of his book, he tells us this is God. Jesus Christ is God. When he comes, he is fulfilling the prophecies about Yahweh returning to Zion. So in fact, this is a very high Christology, not a low Christology. All right. I can't hear you. Could you say it more clearly? Okay. Let us go on here. The prophecy about the messenger who prepares the way is fulfilled by John the Baptist. In its original context, the messenger is preparing the way for Yahweh, the Lord. In Jesus' coming, the prophecy about the coming of Yahweh is fulfilled. In Mark, we see Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of David, the Son of God, the Son of Man, and the Lord.
Sir, comment.
Yes.
Therefore, the Messiah actually has a bigger agenda than what the people think, like a political Messiah. But its agenda was so much bigger than a political king.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, and in Mark, Jesus fulfilled all of these roles. Okay, do you have questions or comments here now on the book of Mark? All right. I would like for us to go ahead and take our 10-minute break right now. On my other computer here, I have it plugged in, but I'm getting a message that the battery is low. And so I'm going to have to figure out what's going on. So let's go ahead and take our break right now and come back in 10 minutes. Okay? Have a good one.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank you, sir.
Recording in progress.
All right, we are going to start now on Luke. And let's first of all look at some general information on Luke. The Gospel of Luke is unique in that it is the first part of a two-part composition. The second part is our book of Acts. So when you study the two, you can't really separate them. We have the same theology in both. It's by the same author, so he has the same interests. And so we need to study the two together. And that unit there is called Luke Acts. The Gospel of Luke is the longest book in the New Testament. It doesn't have the most chapters, but if you compare Matthew with Luke, Matthew has 28 chapters, whereas Luke has 24, but Luke is longer in terms of words. These two books make Luke the largest contributor to the New Testament in terms of amount of writing, 28%, even more than Paul. Now, how do we classify Luke in terms of genre? It's been classified as a gospel because its relationship with the other synoptics there. It's been characterized as historical writing because of its relationship with Acts. Of course, Acts is not a gospel, but Luke is the first part of the two-part work there. And I'm getting some noise. I think maybe Ethel, are you unmuted? Okay.
I muted it.
Okay, thank you. So should Luke be considered a gospel, or should it be considered historical genre? It's been classified both ways by scholars. I think probably we should classify it as a gospel because of its close relationship with Matthew and Mark. In Luke 1:1-4, Luke gives an explanation as to the purpose and methods of writing of his gospel. He says, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught." We see here that Luke did research. And Merle Tenney gives several implications from this. First of all, in the time of the writer, a number of works were extant, that is, they were available, that contained only a partial or possibly garbled account of Jesus' life and work. Luke attempted to give a more complete and/or orderly account. These accounts have attempted some systematic arrangement of available facts. These facts are well known to the Christian world and were accepted independently of the narratives. The author felt himself at least as well informed as the others and is capable of writing an account on his own responsibility. His information came from competent official sources, where he says, who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. He was conversant with the facts, either by observation or by inquiry. Luke's knowledge covered all the major facts. He professed to write accurately and in logical order, not necessarily chronological order. Luke's addressee was probably a man of the upper class, Theophilus, which meant literally lover of God or loved by God. This addressee had already been informed orally concerning Christ and needed further instruction to stabilize him and convince him of the truth. And then number 11, Luke's obvious purpose was to give to his friend complete knowledge of the truth. Now, who was Theophilus? There are those who say that there was actually no such person as Theophilus, because Theophilus, they say, stands for anyone who loved the Lord. But the use of this term, most excellent, in describing him probably speaks against this theory. This was the manner of address that was used for those in authority or those highly respected, as is the case of Felix in the book of Acts, and also Festus. They are both addressed as most excellent. So it seems that Theophilus, a Gentile of social rank, was a recent convert who had received some instruction about Christianity. Further, it seems that this prologue is really a dedication to Theophilus, as we see in other ancient literature. Now, what was the purpose of Luke's gospel? Luke writes for Theophilus in his own words that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. So it was to provide certainty regarding the life of Christ to Theophilus and anyone else who might read the gospel. Gundry says that his purpose was to convince his audience of the gospel's reliability. He also says that Luke wants to establish the religious piety, moral purity, and political innocence of his followers. And this is what Carson and Moo say. Why should Theophilus think that Christianity is the one right religion out of all these alternatives? Why should he think that Christians and not Jews constitute the true people of God, those who are the true heirs of God's Old Testament promises? Why, to put the matter at the most fundamental level, should Theophilus continue to believe that God has revealed himself decisively in Jesus of Nazareth? Luke's gospel, along with the book of Acts, was intended to answer these questions and to give converts to the faith a reason for the hope within them. Kummel says that Luke's purpose is to awaken in Theophilus and in readers generally, by means of trustworthy reproduction of the narratives, complete trust in the contents of Christian teaching. Now, these purposes assume that the audience was Theophilus, or that at least he represented Luke's audience. Actemeyer, Green, and Thompson, though, say that Theophilus was not the audience, but was the patron. The patron would be the financier of the project, but not necessarily the one who would be the intended audience. And so they say the quest for the historical Theophilus then is a blind alley in the search for Luke's audience. They say that Luke's purpose is to strengthen the Christian movement in the face of opposition by ensuring them in their interpretation and experience of the redemptive purpose and faithfulness of God, and by calling them to continued fidelity and witness in their service of the kingdom of God. So Actemeyer, Green, and Thompson say that Theophilus was the one who sponsored Luke's project, but he wasn't the one for whom Luke is writing, in the sense that he is going to be the one reading it. And so there's a little difference then in the purpose, according to Actemeyer, Green, and Thompson. Rather than strengthening Theophilus's faith, they give this purpose that we have right here. Okay, do you have any questions or comments here before we go on? All right. I tell you what, I would like to just take a look at who all is here. Take sort of a roll here, because it seems like that we only have like 17 people here, and that includes me twice. So let me
19,
just see.
sir.
Oh, let's see.
There's 21 in the
Oh, 21. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
19. Okay. We have Humaira and Amy
Hello.
and Hannah and Rebecca. Rebecca.
Present.
Rebecca, there you are. Okay. I knew you were there. And Joanne and Ed.
Doctor. Yes, Doctor.
There. Okay, there we go. Cassidy, I know is there. And Rulia.
Yes, I'm here.
Rulia. Okay, great. Ethel is there. And Abdiel. Yes, okay. Yuki.
Yes.
Yuki, okay. And Mark.
Yes.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm here.
Mark is there. Elise and Daniel. Elise. Okay, and Daniel. Okay. Russell.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Alvin. Okay. Luisa. Is Luisa here?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, good. And Samiti
Yes, sir.
and Yasuo. Okay, good. We are all here. I thought we had more students than that. I guess I was mixed up. All right. Any questions about what we've covered so far in Luke? All right. Okay, the author. The evidence is overwhelming that the author of Acts of Luke is also the author of Acts. In writing style, vocabulary, and theological perspective, the two books are very similar. Both books are addressed to Theophilus, and in fact, Acts 1:1 refers to the former treatise, which is certainly the Gospel of Luke. So if you can identify the author of one, then you've identified the author of the other.
Sir,
Yes.
just for this fact, would we say that he wrote how do you say that? Subsequentially, like after writing Luke, he wrote Acts in probably a timeline, or was there a lag time? And number two, if so, were they in one, like a roll or papyrus, one sequential Luke, Acts, or separate?
Okay, yeah, good questions. Um, it would be logical that Luke was written first,
Mhm.
followed by Acts.
Mhm.
Now, how long a time space was between them, we don't know.
Yes.
But I would say Luke was written, followed by Acts.
Mhm.
Now we're going to get into the date in just a few minutes. But the content of Luke, as well as the content of Acts, would just about fit on one papyrus roll each. So Luke fills one roll with the gospel, and he fills another roll with the book of Acts. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. Acts has we sections, meaning that Luke Acts is not completely anonymous. Who can tell me what a we section is? What is a we section? What do we mean by that?
That pertaining to you, to a certain people.
Say it again, Rebecca. You're muted.
Right. Just referring to, it means to say that the speaker of the sentence of this is it's plural, not only one person speaking, but representing a number of people. The we, like just like we the people, we sections.
Okay.
We section, the sections referring to a certain people speaking for the group. Or what?
So that person who's writing is involved in the narrative.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Specifically, Sister Rebecca is right. Like when Luke is writing about Paul, but he includes himself in the narrative. Like he
Okay.
was a participant of the event.
Yes.
Okay. So that is going to give us a clue as to who the author is, if we can figure out who is there with the we sections. Now, we first see the author refer to himself in an undisputed way in Acts 16:10, which begins the first we section in Acts. This section begins at Troas and ends in Philippi. So it seems that the author joined Paul on his second missionary journey in Troas, went with him to Neapolis and then to Philippi. And then when Paul went on, the author stayed in Philippi because the first we section ends there. The next we section begins at 20 verse 5. At this time, Paul is on his third missionary journey, going back through Macedonia and no doubt Philippi, which is in Macedonia, on his way to Jerusalem. So the author joins Paul in Troas, goes to Philippi. Paul then goes on with his missionary travels, but he comes back through Macedonia, and the author, who is in Philippi, joins him again. And then we have the next we section at 20 verse 5. This we section continues until Paul gets to Jerusalem in 21:18. So from Philippi down at the end of the third missionary journey till Paul gets to Jerusalem. The final we section goes from 27:1 to 28:16, and this covers Paul's journey to Rome. So the author is with Paul during his journey to Rome, the shipwreck and everything. What was the author's identity? It is evident that the author of Luke Acts was a companion of Paul's who was with him during his imprisonment in Rome. Since we know that the author was with Paul in Rome, we can look at the prison epistles of Paul and see who was with him in Rome. There were Epaphras, Timothy, Epaphroditus, Tychicus, Onesimus, Aristarchus, Mark, Jesus called Justus, Luke, Demas, Crescens, and Titus. Here we have 12 people that we know were with Paul in Rome. Tychicus, Timothy, Aristarchus, and Mark are mentioned in Acts in the third person, and so they are eliminated. So we get it down to 8. Epaphras and Epaphroditus did not arrive with Paul when he got to Rome, and so they could not have written the first person account of Paul's arrival there. Of the rest, Luke is the only one who has patristic tradition. That is, that the church fathers identify him as the author. So it is quite certain that Luke is the author of Luke Acts. Now, what can we tell from the internal evidence as to who the author was? First of all, we are told that he was a Gentile. In Acts 1:19, Luke tells of a field that was bought with Judas's blood money, and he reports that it was called Akeldama, which is Aramaic for field of blood. He says that it is in their language, that is the language of the Jews, not our language. So that implies that the author is not a Jew. He is a Gentile. Secondly, secondly, we see a fondness for the city. At least some scholars believe that they see that in the author, which is not characteristic of Jews. And also a fondness for the sea, which is not characteristic. Read the Old Testament and you'll see that the Jews do not like the ocean. Ever since Jonah, they have not liked the ocean. And so that is not a Jewish kind of thing. Also in Colossians 4, Paul lists several people, and then he says that they were the only Jews who were his fellow workers. Then he tells of others whom we would assume were not Jews, and among them, he mentions Luke. So this is all evidence for arriving at the conclusion that Luke was a Gentile. Paul tells us that Luke was a physician. Now, the language of Luke Acts doesn't demand that it be written by a physician, but certainly it's compatible with that. The external evidence consistently points to Luke as the author, and the internal evidence also seems to support it. So we would conclude then that the author of the Gospel and of Acts is Luke. The date. Acts ends when Paul is in prison in Rome, which would be AD 62 to 64. It is hard to conceive of Luke's omitting of Paul's martyrdom if it had taken place at that time. Luke was no doubt written before Acts, So that would move the date earlier. An approximate date would be the early 60s. So I would see Luke then as written in the early 60s, before the book of Acts. And it seems that the book of Acts was completed while Paul was in prison in Rome, under house arrest. And we'll go into that a little more when we get to the book of Acts. Place. Tradition supports both Rome and Achaia. So both of these are supported by tradition. We don't really know for sure where it might be. In terms of content, this is Kumel's outline of Luke. The prologue, which we read just a minute ago, the first principal part, the birth narrative through Jesus' baptism. Second principal part, Jesus' activity in Galilee. Third principal part, beginning of the journey to Jerusalem. Fourth principal part, renewed beginning of the journey to Jerusalem. Fifth principal part, Jesus in Jerusalem. Now, note again the Markan framework here. Mark doesn't have the birth narrative, but he does have everything else: ministry in Galilee, journey to Jerusalem, ministry in Jerusalem. Questions, comments?
Question, please.
Yes, Elise.
I'm just asking. That's all I want. I'm just asking. Do you think is there in the descriptions of Luke's involvement with Paul? Do you think does he have any influence in the letters, in Paul's letters? Do you have any?
Okay, does he have any influence in the letters?
Yeah, what I mean is involvement in writing or something like that. Do you? Because according to your descriptions, that he was very much involved with the life of Paul. So I'm just asking that question.
Okay.
You know, of course, that's all.
Yeah. It's interesting that Luke in Acts never mentions Paul's letters. Curious fact, even though that was very important in Paul's life. Now, there are those who believe, and I am sort of inclined that way too, that Luke could possibly have been Paul's secretary for the pastoral epistles, 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. So we don't know for sure that that's the case, but it may very well have been that Luke could have been Paul's secretary in writing those epistles. We'll get into this, but Paul used secretaries to write his epistles. And even in Romans 16:22, Tertius, his secretary, says hello to everybody. I, Tertius, who write this letter, greet you. So we actually have the name of one of his secretaries. And it could be that Luke was Paul's secretary in writing the pastoral epistles. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments here? All right.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Did Luke, Luke cheated from Mark? Like you said, some of the Markan framework is in Luke. Did he cheat or copied or some?
Yes, I think so. I think Luke used Mark. You know, if we go back to our source criticism here, the synoptic problem, that
Yeah.
Luke used Mark and Q,
Okay.
and plus some other material that are not in any of the other synoptics. Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Sir, I have a question.
All right.
I have heard of the Lucan pneumatology. Where would he have developed? Would it be in both Luke and Acts, or just one of them? If I were to look for it.
In both.
In both. Okay.
In both. Yes, he writes from the same perspective.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Right.
I only remember the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The narrative was in Acts, but not in Luke. So he does develop that concept in both books then. Okay.
Yes, and we will look at that in just a minute.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. Let's look at some of the characteristics of the book of Luke. One thing is literary excellence. Luke is the most literary of the Gospels. The songs of the birth narrative are gems of expression in the style of the Old Testament. The Magnificat, Mary's song, there in chapter 1. The Benedictus, the song of Zacharias. The Gloria in Excelsis by the angels, and the Nunc Dimittis, Simeon's prayer. All of these show really great excellence of style, and all done in the style of the Old Testament. In fact, I was just reading the other day in 1 Samuel where Hannah has a song, and the style is very similar to Mary's song right here in Luke. So literary excellence, when it comes to the Gospels, the most excellent in terms of literature, of writing style, is Luke. We also see a concern for history. Luke takes special care to relate the biblical events to history. If you look at Luke 1:5, 2:1, and 3:1 and 2, Luke tells us who was ruling at that time, and so he pins his events in the gospel to secular history. Let's also look at Luke's special emphases. One, universality. Now, by this, we're not saying that Luke taught everybody's going to be saved. Okay, it's not universalism. It's universality. In other words, that God is concerned about everyone. It is not limited to a particular ethnic group, to a particular race or particular language or social status, but God is concerned about everyone. First of all, the Greco-Roman world. We saw that he dates his events by secular events. So tying it into the history of the Greco-Roman world. There is in the song there that the Jews are to be a light to the Gentiles, or I believe it was the Messiah, to be a light to the Gentiles. Also, it says all people will see God's salvation. Also note that Luke's genealogy goes back to Adam, not to Abraham. So he shows God's concern for the entire human race, not just the Jewish people. He also has the Great Commission there in 24:47. Now, in preaching at his hometown in Nazareth, let me just read you what Luke says in 4:23 to 27. There it says, Jesus said to them, "Surely you will quote this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself.' And you will tell me, 'Do here in your hometown what we have heard you did in Capernaum.' Truly I tell you," he continued, "no prophet is accepted in his hometown." Now remember, this is in Nazareth where Jesus grew up. "I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time, when the sky was shut for 3.5 years and there was a severe famine throughout the land. Yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon, outside of Israel. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet, yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian." So here, Jesus, in giving his inaugural address at the beginning of his ministry, points out the fact that God was concerned about outsiders, foreigners, the widow from Zarephath in the region of Sidon, not Israel. And it was Naaman the leper who was cured of leprosy, not an Israelite. Now, the people of Nazareth didn't appreciate this, and they tried to kill him. You remember, they tried to push him off a cliff, and he escaped from them. But here again is the emphasis that God is concerned about everyone. This quotation, by the way, appears only in Luke. Next, God is concerned about social outcasts. We have the immoral woman in chapter 7, the woman who came and washed Jesus' feet with her tears, dried them with her hair. Here it was at a banquet, and the host knew what kind of woman she was, and Jesus took up for her. He is concerned about even people like that. Zacchaeus, Luke tells about on Jesus' journey through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. Zacchaeus, a despised tax collector, yet God is concerned about him. The repentant thief on the cross, probably a terrible man that most of the people wouldn't want to associate with. But Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." He gives the parable of the prodigal son, the one who goes out, spends his money in a way that isn't good, and yet he's welcomed back home by the Father. There is a story of the repentant tax collector in chapter 18. There is the Samaritan village that did not welcome Jesus. James and John said, "Should we call down fire from heaven to consume them like Elijah did?" And Jesus said, no, we're not going to do that. There's the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan we're very familiar with. We're very familiar with the phrase Good Samaritan. And that's because we are familiar with the parable. But to a first century Jew, those two words would not go together. Good and Samaritan are an oxymoron. Do you know what an oxymoron is? It's two words that just don't fit together, like cold fire or hot ice. Good Samaritan, it just doesn't work. And but for Jesus, this Samaritan is good. to the great surprise, unbelief of the people there who would have heard him. Jesus healed 10 lepers. Only one of them returned to give thanks. And Jesus tells us that he was a Samaritan. So the social outcasts, the Samaritans were not welcomed by the Jews, and the hatred was mutual. But God is concerned about social outcasts. Also the poor. In Jesus' message in Nazareth, he quotes Isaiah 61. I have come to preach good news to the poor. In the song in chapter 1, it talks about the lowly being exalted. In the Sermon on the Plain in Luke, it's parallel to the Beatitudes in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew, it says, blessed is the poor in spirit. But in Luke, it's blessed are the poor. He gives woes against the rich and the full. He also tells us who to invite to dinner. He says, don't invite your rich friends. They will just invite you back. That is not giving, that is trading. He says, when you give a dinner, invite the poor, invite those who cannot repay you. He calls the Pharisees lovers of money. He tells the parables of the rich fool, the dishonest manager, and the rich man and Lazarus. So in Luke, we see a concern for the poor. Also, there is an emphasis on women. We have Mary, Elizabeth, and Anna, all prominent in the nativity story. There's the widow of Nain, whose son was raised from the dead. Luke tells us of women who supported Jesus financially. He also tells us of the immoral woman that we mentioned just a minute ago. Not only was she immoral, she was also a woman. She had 2 strikes against her. Luke tells us of Mary and Martha. Also the poor widow who gave all she had. He tells us of women who lamented Jesus, watched the crucifixion, and intended to embalm him, but witnessed the empty tomb instead and reported the resurrection. Jesus really elevated the status of women. In that culture, women were not high in rank, but Jesus elevated them. And to think that the first witnesses of the resurrection were women would be almost unthinkable in that culture. And yet that is the way it was. So women are emphasized in the book of Luke. So the first thing that we see is universality. God is concerned about everyone. He's concerned about the Greco-Roman world, the social outcasts, the poor, and the women. And let me just cover one other thing before we leave. And that is, there is an emphasis here on prayer. At key points in Jesus' ministry, Luke tells us that Jesus prayed at his baptism, after ministering to the crowds in chapter 5. Before choosing the 12, Luke tells us that he prayed all night. Before Peter's confession and Jesus' prediction of his own death and resurrection. On the return of the 72, Jesus prayed. Before teaching the disciples to pray. In Gethsemane, of course, Jesus prayed. Twice on the cross. And then we have the 2 parables about prayer. And we are told that Jesus prayed especially for Peter. All right, we are going to stop here. The first section of New Testament introduction, the Tuesday, Thursday section, was one lesson ahead of you. Because we weren't able to do the last one, you have now caught up to section 1. So we're at the same place for section 1 and section 2. So I think that I'm going to have the people from section 1 join us maybe next time. Or they can hear the recording at any rate of what they may have missed. Okay, well, we will stop here, and we will take up here then on Friday morning. Let me ask if there are any questions or comments before we sign off. Any questions, comments?
So just a comment on the literary ability or of Luke.
Yes.
In literature, because I just remember in my class in wisdom literature that the professor mentioned that the literature is not only in the book of Psalms and the wisdom literature only, but also in the Gospels. And so I just remember when you mentioned about this in the literary skills of Luke. And they were also the same examples that my professor before mentioned as in the literary aspect of the Bible. It's not only in the wisdom literature or in the wisdom gospel books, but also in the Gospels. And those are one of those that he mentioned.
Okay. Well, thank you,
Yes.
Rebecca. All right. Well, the Lord bless you, and we will see you on Friday morning.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
God bless. See you soon.
Bye-bye.